Further debate. I recognize the member from Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to begin again by thanking my colleague for Toronto Centre for a truly great one-hour lead and all the work that's been done to engage people in a serious way with respect to access to justice. I agree with the member when they said the goal of access to justice has to be a fundamental goal to the province of Ontario. And I think until you become responsible for the development of policy, you don't see it. When people think about provincial politics, we think about healthcare and education, the two biggest items, apart from tax expenditures, on the government's budget. And rightly we should. But we don't think about how we fund opportunities for people to get access to justice when they are accused of a crime or when they are victims seeking redress for a crime. So I want to thank the member for Toronto Centre for the work that was done in that one-hour lead, and I really hope a lot of people paying attention to this debate revisit this, because the 11 proposals that we brought forward were brought forward in good faith, and it's disappointing in this House to know that these proposals were rejected and to hear them being rejected in this chamber again. I want to also thank, getting myself ready for today, were a couple of very talented criminal lawyers from back home, one of whom is known as a leading criminal lawyer in the country, Michael Spratt, who has spoken eloquently in recent months. Aaron Durant, the member for Toronto Centre, also mentioned. And these are members that are ringing the alarm bell, because once upon a time, we used to have a Judicial Appointments Advisory Committee that was the envy of the world, regarded as the gold standard, where visiting jurists, visiting legal experts from other countries actually come to this part of Canada, who come to Ontario, to understand how we select our justices. But that all changed, Speaker, under the terms of this government. In 2019, Attorney General Downey was very clear in an interview with Steve Paikin from TVO. The Attorney General wants judges appointed that, quote, resemble my values. Wow. Attorney General Downey beat the Premier to the punch. The Premier's getting a lot of negative press, deservedly, I think, in the last 2 weeks. But the Attorney General made that very crystal clear in 2019. And then in 2021, the Attorney General got the power, thanks to something afforded to him by this government, to reject suggestions from the Judicial Appointments Advisory Committee, to ask for the deck to be reshuffled until the political purity test was reached. Yeah. And now we have a situation where there are two individuals now involved with the Judicial Appointments Advisory Committee, one of whom is a very close ally, Mr. Bondi, of this government, and another, Mr. Bandrick, is known to have very conservative, punitive-minded opinions about how we deal with criminal justice in this province. So it's never been ambiguous, I will say that. It's never been ambiguous about where this government was going. What is ambiguous is the commitment this government has to justice. I will note only the adjectives of the bills that are before this House. We're talking about Bill 157 today, enhancing Access to Justice Act. 3 years ago, we were talking about the Accelerating Access to Justice Act. Do the adjectives get weaker as the lousy pieces of legislation get proposed? What's going to be the next one? Inching towards access to justice? Because when I talk to Michael Spratt back home, he tells me that the Ottawa courthouse is not just, as we've heard in the member for Toronto Centre's remarks at committee and here today, it's not just double booked. Last year, the Ottawa courthouse was triple booked. Currently, right now, as I am making my remarks, it is quadruple booked. Quadruple booked. So if you've been waiting for your day in court to stare someone who has harmed you in the eye, thinking about someone who is the victim of gender-based violence, and you summon that courage, and you marshal your resources, and you walk into the Ottawa courthouse today, there's a 25% chance that you're going to get your day in court, despite the fact that you've waited your time. Can you imagine the message that sends, Speaker? What is the message that sends? Now, I heard one of the members over there talk about the fantastic investments made in courthouse staff. I'm not aware of it. I know the member for Toronto Centre has consulted extensively with the people required, the staff, not just the jurists, but the staff required to do all of the work to bring people through the system. We haven't seen those investments trickle through. So maybe we are inching towards justice. Maybe we are reclining towards justice. Maybe we are backsliding in the face of injustice. Maybe that's what's actually going on. Let me give you an actual anecdote, Speaker. I want to talk about the courthouse in Cornwall, neighbouring city to Ottawa, where I live in Eastern Ontario. I want to talk about the needs that they have. On November 19th, 2021, the Attorney General was advised of the fact that there would be an imminent vacancy in that courthouse and that action needed to be made in order for the Judicial Appointments Advisory Committee to drop a list to replace that jurist. On December 24th, 2021, the vacancy actually happens. July 15th, 2022, recommendations are submitted to the Attorney General. And I have on good authority from people who are consultants to that process involved in that work that there were wonderful names, wonderfully talented people who were known not as partisans but known as lawyers that could have filled that spot. But on February 8th, so let's go through the chronology here, July 15th, 2022, the recommendations are submitted to the Attorney General. The following year, February 8th, 2023, Attorney General Downey rejects the list. Rejects the list. Now, all this time, from December 24th, 2021 to February 8th, 2023, the people of Cornwall are without a jurist in their court. They're short a jurist in their court. So, I just want to say, Speaker, for the record in this House, that I am making this speech today in early March in 2024, Speaker, and the position has yet to be filled. The position is yet to be filled. How, in heaven's name, can a government that purports to care about crime and to support the victims of crime kick the can down the road for 3 years? How can you purport to hold forth in this place and talk about the need for us to be serious about crime and ignore due process and access to justice in the city of Cornwall? So what I do know is that the Attorney General has been busy, though, not in helping to staff the courthouse in Cornwall, but he has been very busy in judicial appointments. Since 2019, Attorney General Downey has appointed 90 judges to the Ontario Court of Justice, and interestingly, as Michael Spratt notes, 70% of those appointments are provincial or federal prosecutors. 15% of the appointees had a background in criminal defense. Yeah. So what kind of values are we now? Nobody, whether one's a prosecutor or a defender, you don't come with the exact worldview. But it's important, I would think, for a measure of balance in our system, to have different mindsets of practice entering into the bench. But that is not what we're seeing in the appointments Mr. Downey is making. And I'm not even doing a political screen. I'm doing an employment screen there. So the Ottawa courthouses are quadruple booked. The Ottawa courthouses are quadruple booked. In Toronto, they're double booked. And what happens? Let's drill down, Speaker, to what happens at the individual level when these things take place. When you wait for your day in court and you go to court hoping that you get your measure of justice. CBC Toronto reported the story of someone named Taylor. This isn't the actual person's name. It's a pseudonym because this is a sexual assault matter. But Taylor had waited for a day of court justice and stood before that court only to find out that it was actually not going to be heard that day. It had already been dismissed once for 7 months. And in this moment, and I'm going to quote Taylor's words, "I made eye contact with the accused in the courtroom. It's like your body is going into flight or fight mode when you're there and you have to live through that whole experience." She feels the system failed her. And it did. And it did. And yet, this government has a $5.4 billion contingency fund, and yet we find the capacity to utilize the public servants of Ontario to sign a 95-year lease for a private luxury spa at what is now Ontario Place. And yet, we can spend all kinds of money on things, but we do not put it into courthouses in Cornwall, we do not put it into courthouses in Toronto, and we sure as heck don't put it into the courthouse in Ottawa. Now, Speaker, I'm going to get into another challenging story in a minute, but I actually want to talk about someone who, in the middle of this mess, is trying to make some humanity happen at the Ottawa Courthouse. And I want to talk about Constable Sue Kelly. Constable Sue Kelly runs a winter clothing drive at the Ottawa Courthouse. Has done it for a long time. And why? Because if you can believe it, Speaker, in many cases, when someone is into the court and they have been arrested and detained in spring, in summer, and you are released in the wintertime, it is often the case, Constable Kelly tells me, that you are pushed outside with literally nothing warm to wear, with nothing to your name. And as I said before in questions to a different member of this House, I hope every member of this House does get the opportunity, if you haven't yet, to visit your local correctional institution and to talk to the people incarcerated there and to talk to the people who work there and to talk to some of the families that advocate for their loved ones in there. Or, frankly, more likely, the people who have no one to advocate for them in there. And what I think you're going to find, and what Constable Kelly has certainly found, is that our correction systems have become the new warehouse for the poor, for people who have mental health trauma. And the amount of money we spend in that warehousing system and then shunting people in my very cold city in Ottawa in the middle of the winter, I mean, we've literally had people have to be admitted, according to Constable Kelly, to the emergency rooms in our city because of frost exposure. Like Constable Kelly's colleagues had picked up people just released from the Ottawa courthouse and brought them directly. The amount of money that we are spending because of a misguided approach to how we deal with people who've made mistakes, made errors, is staggering to me. It's absolutely staggering. But I want to thank Constable Kelly for her leadership. She runs a clothing drive. Our office is proud to take part in it. Other political offices do. And I think this is an example of somebody in a deeply inhumane situation trying to show some respect to people who deserve respect. So I want to now go, Speaker, to a challenging story. I want to talk about Anne-Marie Reddy and Jasmine Reddy. So these are two wonderful people we lost, who actually live not in Ottawa Centre, Speaker, they live in Ottawa South. And if you type those names into the Google, you'll find the story yourself. Anne-Marie and Jasmine were killed in their own home by a deeply troubled, habitually violent young man. And I knew them because they were black belt teachers in my son's martial arts studio. I knew Anne-Marie and Jasmine because they had helped train my son. And on June 27, 2022, when Raphael, the husband, was in Barbados on business, a troubled person enters the family home, proceeds to clinically go through the process of a stupendously violent act, the details for which I won't rehearse here, you can find them. Raphael and Catherine, the two survivors of this family tragedy, have decided to be public about this. Courageous as that is, difficult as that may be. But what troubles me in this bill, Speaker, is when I think about something like this. The member for Ottawa South, what we have tried to do to comfort Raphael, what is in this bill to help families who find themselves in situations like this? I note that the Victim Quick Response Plus program exists, but as the member for Toronto Centre has said, it's a dramatic downscaling of capacity to help families in crisis. Basically, if you qualify for the financial income screen, you might get $1,000 for counseling. You might. Under the previous Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, someone could apply for up to $30,000 in support and $5,000 specifically for pain and suffering. But if you talk to Raphael today, and I've given his contact information to members of the government who tour through our city because I want them to meet him. Because what he has ceased to do working with the Ottawa Police Service, with victim survivors groups, is he wants to mobilize his grief and pain into action to help other families survive the horror that he's going to live with and his daughter Catherine, who survived this attack, for the rest of their lives. And there is nothing in Bill 157 to move any serious steps towards that. Nothing at all. And that's a real missed opportunity, because the member for Toronto Centre went to committee, and one of the specific proposals was to finally ramp up resources for rape crisis centres and sexual assault organizations in our city, so we don't just, as was said already very well, wear the the purple shirts, the purple scarves, but we bring the resources of this province to bear on the organizations in our communities that are going to be there for Raphael, for Catherine, for so many other people across this province. And we have the Renfrew County Inquest report in our hands. As the member said, we are dealing with an epidemic of violence in our communities. And if you did have occasion to read, and you should if you haven't yet, the inquest in Nova Scotia into the multiple shooting incident out there, again, the evidence keeps coming back to the fact that if we can reach people who have propensity to pathological violence early, as these behaviors develop, we prevent tragedy later. But that expertise is found in the community. It's found in the community, and it needs to be funded. It shouldn't be on the back of an envelope. Many of us recently, I think, were marching in the coldest day of the year events all over Ontario, all over Canada. At home, we were holding up the Ottawa Mission and the Cornerstone Women's Shelter as wonderful organizations that do a lot of good. That's terrific. But I actually want to see in Ontario one day where support for people facing gender-based violence, sexual assault, trying to recover, perpetrators of these crimes too, where we actually take this as seriously as we treat healthcare and education. Because to my mind, our family is raising 2 children. There are lots of parents in this house. I can only imagine we want to have a criminal justice system that will be there long before a tragedy happens to help people. Because if it isn't, then we're failing people. We're failing the 125 cases, Speaker, that were tossed out last year in the province of Ontario because these are sexual assault, gender-based violence cases, because of lack of access to justice. Because we have a precedent, R.V. Jordan in 2016, that says if you have to wait for longer than 30 months in Superior Court or 18 months in provincial courts, you can have your case thrown out. But what also gets thrown out apart from the case, in my opinion, Speaker, is the dignity of this province, not just the dignity of the person. We fail ourselves. And it's a preventable situation. I want to end, Speaker, on a completely different note, and I hope my colleagues permit me to say it. Yesterday, I was at the St. Elias Church, just south of where I am in Ottawa South, Ottawa Centre. I was invited there by the Syrian Club of Canada. And I was in the room with family members, as I have been, and I'm sure all of us have been doing this, who have lost family members given the war in Gaza and in Israel. We have talked to people who have suffered from violence in Israel and suffered from violence in Gaza. And there is yet to be a unified statement in this place to join what our Prime Minister has said, finally, to call for an end to that violence. And I was asked yesterday by the elders of the Syrian Club of Canada if I would bring that message again, because I have brought it here before, for us to come together across all caucuses, regardless of partisan lines, to simply say it is time for the violence to stop, and everybody who has suffered, all the crimes that have committed must be investigated. But the horrifying images we are continuing to see on our television screens, Speaker, this legislature needs to stand together and we have to say, stop. And I want to thank the 100,000 people in Michigan who told President Biden very clearly that he must play a role on the world stage as a global leader to ask for this to stop. We all want access to justice, Speaker. We want it here in Ontario. We want it for people in Gaza. We want it for people in Israel. We want it for people everywhere. But it will never happen by accident. The only way we get results is if we use the resources we have to speak out. We use the platforms that we have to speak out. So this is our opportunity to do it. And I hope the government was listening to the member for Toronto Centre. This bill could be made better. It doesn't have to be ceremonial. Thank you.